This is the woman who was sitting on the sidewalk outside Remnant Protesting's letter she had previously sent to the entire Remnant Fellowship leadership. There were at least 100 emails that it had been sent to, which is basically how it has recently come into my possession. Keep in mind, this is written from the perspective of a fully entrenched, supportive of Remnant person. I'll read it for you and then make a few observations. My deepest apologies for the burdensome journal I now lay at your feet. It bears my whole zealous, troubled heart. I have not held back, and so it is very sensitive to me. Please read this with so much love and distress, as that is the manner in which it was written. Please excuse any grammatical errors or areas lacking clarity. I am happy to talk about this at your leisure. As requested by my beloved husband, I have had 2 days of prayer and seeking God prior to sending this in, so I know it will require prayer and love to respond. Some of my questions have already been filtered through Al and Jan Vorse, though they took these questions and made them far less emotional and better worded. I will be patient in your reply, and I do so look forward to the refinement I will inevitably receive in this. God has shown me a bit of his personality through my husband's humble, discerning, patient, and gentle leadership. I am happy to allow him full surrender and leadership in our home. I am happy using my humble discernment to recognize when I'm being asked to be a sounding board for him, to think and process, while finding God's lead in our home. I'm also happy to go to him with all questions and concerns in full confidence that he has my heart in his hands. He has never hurt this relationship, though I cannot say that I have been without fault. This is my expectation and experience with leadership in action. It is pure love. And while I do not always get an answer, or an answer I see as best, I always get love. These are my questions and concerns I ask of a leadership I hold in high regard, one who has been entrusted with leading my heart and the hearts of my children. To them, I hold a higher accountability for their management of connection to God and spiritual growth for themselves and the leadership of my family. For this is far more important to me than the beautiful marriage I have had the pleasure of having. This beautiful marriage is in part due to Gwen's clear interpretation of God's word and powerful, convicting messages that she selflessly shared with me. Despite much hurt, grief, and worldly troubles she went through, she still made God look good. She normalized being different from the world and being bold for God. She wanted to protect God and not herself, and would not want God to look weird. My heart is troubled, and I feel called to test the fruit, spirits, and know that it is good. Gwen's fruit is enough for me to know that while her leadership was not perfect, it was good and always growing in God. The fruit spoke for itself. It has been easy to discredit Michael, as the fruit of his life is also evident. But now I find credibility to some accusations, and I feel the strongest conviction to test the fruit. God brought to my mind 2 months ago, I had bought a watermelon. It looked and smelled perfectly. Yet, while I was cleaning the kitchen, the watermelon exploded next to me. It was rotten in the middle. I need to know that the leadership I have placed over me, for the most part, without question, has it spoiled. I have not been asleep for the last 3 years. There is a time for grief and mourning and regrouping. and I am not God and will not assume to know what that timeline is. However, with these recent accusations, I will also raise questions. Not questions out of agitation, but out of deep concern, sadness, and the pursuit of godliness. My need is to lead my family to the entrance of heaven. I remember a church that was so desperate to cling to God, and I want to make sure that remains. I remember a leadership that came around the hurting, the trial-ridden, the out-of-towners. I remember phone calls and emails from Gwen, Ted and Candace, David and Jennifer Martin, and Marcus Francis. Personally, they cared deeply for God's people, not only in leadership guidance, but also just encouragement and fellowship. I remember huddling around a phone or TV just to hear Gwen read straight from the Bible. I saw changed lives and healing. Is God still with us? Are we too prideful that we have thrown off the basics? What has happened to us? In contrast, today, as an out-of-towner with 4 small children and a recent journey in health, I have not had one phone call or email from leadership to check on me. I have had one faithful leader in Cindy Barker to check in on me during this year via text, which unwittingly puts the burden on me to respond and to keep leadership appraised of my condition, to find the words when ill and raising my own children. Even I was surprised to know that this would be exhausting. To bring balance to my appraisal. Yes, I was given some beautiful flowers from Elizabeth, and perhaps even prayed for by her. I know I was prayed for by my small group leaders and fellowship church members. I also received a very generous gift from the beautiful small group I'm honored to be a part of. Yet, I need to say, I've had church members reach out more than the shepherds. I see people that still practice what Gwen has taught, but I have not been taught anything by Elizabeth this year. Am I losing touch? Are we losing our way? We as a congregation have been patient, giving the space, prayers, and support during Elizabeth's hardship as is appropriate. But what is being reinvested into our congregation? Watered down, shortened clips from Gwen, testimonials of the congregation, and concerts of worship. Could not the counterfeit church do these things? I did not join this church for normal church experiences. I joined for godliness, and that is what I seek. Is it still here? Is there still an energy of excitement to gather and talk about God? It's not here in Michigan. We've been, by and large, forgotten, unless there is a need for tithe or social media likes and comments on Elizabeth's social media pages, of which do not point people to the church or even God in some. Now, I'm a reasonable person and know that not all things on social media need to do so, but it's telling when the frequency is as it is. We are told to be fully transparent to leadership for accountability, and now I ask the same. If the burden of single motherhood, business owner times 5, author, church leader is too much, then I agree. Outsource management of some of these burdens. Appoint a stand-in manager of the businesses or a temporary pastor to bear responsibility. I do not expect Elizabeth to do it all, nor does God. My heart breaks for her heavy load. Let it be lightened. I want the best for her. I have nothing to apologize for. I have answers for everything. This is a quote from Elizabeth Hannah. But has she brought embarrassment to God's house and publicly without shame? Is this pride? I'm fearful to even ask. I want a leader on stage, a leader that is so in love with God. May it be Elizabeth or another. I wanted diverse leadership, one of all ages and experiences. I want seasoned veteran councilmen and women who have weathered these storms before and willing to give sage wisdom. Not only investing time with the RF youth development. I want a leadership I know is seeking God and not partying all night with kids drinking, smoking, or inappropriate talk, avoiding all extremes. I want access to my leader. Even the counterfeit have this. I want to know why we are pulling the PR stunt as a church of send in your questions so we can carefully curate what you need to know. I want it to be plain. Purity begets purity. Do we have something to hide? I want a real counter to the accusations the Rickmans have shared and are now embarrassingly public on Michael's social media pages. Is this who I've been praying for and defending? I want to know if Elizabeth's health is something I should be praying for. Her weight and face modifications are alarming. Gwen's hair was a conversation of divisiveness, but that was preference and silly. Elizabeth is to be a representation of God and this church and a model for my daughter and sons, and I am concerned. I want to know why Elle Baker's remarriage wasn't celebrated or made public if there was no indiscretion. She had been through the ringer, and the people of the church had no knowledge. In 8 days, post-divorce gives the illusion of sin. It at minimum makes a man wonder and might put off seekers, not to mention the secrecy involved. I want to know why the Anjays and Day leaders have seemed to step down and seem to have now re-risen in leadership. Does Rob Day know that his interactions on Michael's page are embarrassing? Let mockers mock, but if there is truth to the claim, let leaders be humble and repent. I want to see the financials. Even some counterfeit churches do this. To be above reproach. If there's nothing to hide, it should not be a problem. I don't want an echo chamber of memories of changed lives. I want current fruit cultivated by current leadership. Not a leadership that goes around telling out-of-town members to not approach Elizabeth on her first day back. People who have driven countless hours or flown across the world for an exciting festival, wanting to lift hands of worship with a missed leader. She did not need to get on stage, but to be present with saints. Even Elizabeth's children have wanted to be in the presence of saints these last several years. It would not have been so difficult for her had she been into church prior to an overwhelming festival. Again, no judgments, only statements of a 2020 vision and a wish for leadership to know how that comes off. I want us to be better and sharpened for the next misstep. For Gwen had more than 30 years of sage learning, and with the benefit of it not being on social media. I am sure she learned along the way too, as we all do. As an established member with many years of training, I know persecution too. Persecution means being treated unjustly when we are blameless. Are we blameless? I also know humility, and when it has failed. Even CEOs must walk back embarrassment on occasion, seeking forgiveness. Are we too prideful? Can a congregate request accountability without being divisive? I am not throwing stones looking for blood. I am looking forward to this church's lasting success. I want to know why we are trying to be a normal church. Is God still with us? Or are we another cult? Have the skirts been lifted? Gwen's life was exemplary, and that is undeniable. Is Elizabeth's? I pray so. Is this church leadership asleep? I pray not. I want to raise my children with like-minded believers. But if the fruit proves to be lacking, it would be better returning to home church, loving God first and then others, rather than stay under a leadership that makes God look weird. I want to forgive a humble leadership who makes tragic mistakes, repents, and changes. My heart is weary of platitudes. I need to know that what I am fighting for is firmly planted on God and lived through leadership and the congregation as Jesus Christ did. I will defend and weather the storm for a righteous people. Are we still them? While I await peace in my heart, I will look inward, I will pray, I will seek God's face, and I will ask questions, humbly waiting for God's answers and leading. I will pray for a baptism of spirit with a renewed life and surrender to God, starting with me. I will pray for purity, starting with me. I will pray for love in action, starting with me. I will pray for our children's inheritance in a righteous church, starting with me. I will pray for accountability and humility, starting with me. I will pray for conviction and change, starting with me. I will pray for God's face to remain at Remnant Fellowship Church, with concern and love regarding the state of the church. Courtney Groeneweg. Now, I don't even want to go into the obvious things which I would not completely agree with in this letter. It's obvious to anyone who's been on these social media pages or seen my Channel 5 interview that I felt the sin and corruption began while Gwen was leading the church, long ago. Let me be clear. Also, the obvious calling all the other churches counterfeit, which is basic remnant cult teachings 101, and is a huge topic in itself which I've looked at. But all that aside, this whole thing is an interesting look at what someone's thinking who's desperately hoping and clinging to trying to make this church look inward at its own faults, while still completely being supportive, wanting this place to last and be pure for her children. This is what she sent into leadership with receiving no response. And then they kicked her out of the church, removing her from the directory. That's when she felt led by God to go sit and protest in front of the remnant, which many of you saw on my Facebook live stream. I was thinking hard on if I should get this letter out to the whole public, letting remnant members see it, because I assure you, RF leadership definitely hid this from the church as a whole, which was one of her issues that she'd mentioned as she protested. After considering, even though it also casts a negative light on how I'm looked at, being talked about amongst remnant leaders and members about the less than wholesome fruit of my life, possibly referring to weight, being darker than normal, HBO, anything. Keep in mind, I already knew they were saying these things, but it was a nice refresher for me to hear again. Even the subtle reference to me being a mocker. But once again, I'll say this is completely understandable coming from someone who, at the time, was currently inside Remnant and desperately trying to support or defend it. Either way, this is something big which needs to be seen, whether it casts negative light on me or not. There were too many majorly jaw-dropping questions and well-worded points posed in this letter. Maybe even her prayers that God would let people see have been answered. Who knows? As I'll let you all take what you want out of all this, I somewhat feel a strange sense of irony, as the person who was considered by this woman at certain points to be Satan or bringing accusations or a mocker, ends up, after all that, being the one who gets this letter to the remnant church leadership out. After all, maybe that's just how God works sometimes, using imperfect people to accomplish something. Strange how these things work out.